Ishan Shanavas may not have promises to keep, but he surely has miles to go. So he manages his time standing and staring at lovely dark and deep woods as he traverses swathes of the country to tell people what it means and what it takes to care for nature. Ishan is a 22-year-old environmentalist and best-selling author of The Light of Wilder Things.
Hi, I'm Ishan Shanavas and I'm a wildlife and nature enthusiast. I've been interested in nature and wildlife for as long as I can remember. I remember as a child sitting on my balcony and watching a white-cheeked barbet, which is the small green bird, nest in this dead tree outside my house. And I spent those days just watching this bird and watching the chicks grow up and leave the nest to discover their place in this world. And I think that really had an effect on me. Seeing this interest, my parents encouraged it. My dad got me a lot of these wildlife photo books that I spent hours just looking over. It was such a crazy thing to me for that these creatures actually existed on our planet. You know, all these bizarre creatures, from jaguars to polar bears to dragonflies and everything in between. Growing up, I wasn't allowed that much TV and certainly not cartoons as much. And so instead, I spent my time watching channels like Animal Planet and Discovery and National Geographic, of course. And I think those people became my heroes, those naturalists I saw on the TV screen and their journeys exploring the wild spaces of our planet. And so I think all of this culminated one day when I was in 8th standard. I remember my dad took me to Bandipur Tiger Reserve, which lines the southern border of Karnataka, between Karnataka and Kerala and Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. We had to go there for some work that he had. And that day we went on a safari just like any other tourist. And that day, just as the sun was about to set, our jeep made a turn and in front of us there was a tiger, a wild tiger. This was the first time I was seeing a tiger, and this was certainly a creature much bigger than I had imagined a tiger to be. And there was this one lovely, powerful moment when we ended up being in front of the tiger, and the tiger stopped and looked at the jeep and it stared into my eyes. And to me, it seemed like this tiger was staring into my soul. And I knew in that moment, I could physically almost feel something shift inside me. I knew in that moment that I had to do something in my life to speak for these creatures. They've given me something to be fascinated about, something to live for. And it's only fair that I paid forward. And so I think a lot of what happened since then, since that fateful day in 2017, I think has been influenced by that one particular instance. So immediately that year, I left school in Bangalore and I joined a boarding school. This boarding school is called Rishi Valley. It's located in a forested valley in rural Andhra Pradesh, in the beginning of the Eastern Ghats. This school is spread across 365 acres, 3/4 of which is just jungle. And so I ended up doing a lot of my schooling next to wildlife and living next to wildlife during those 4 years. I ended up being that kid who was called to toss out snakes and frogs and scorpions that came into the buildings. I can tell you, I remember one instance. I can name several instances, but I remember one particular instance sitting in class during a maths class and listening to what the teacher was saying. And I happened to sit next to the window, and so my gaze just shifted outside the window onto a copperpot tree, which was next to my classroom. And I looked at the tree and I saw something draped along the bark. And I thought that was a rope because of the way this thing was put. But slowly that rope started moving, and then I realized it's not a rope. It's a bronzeback tree snake just snaking up the trunk of this tree. And that snapped me out of that stupor that I was in. And so I jumped out of the classroom. We had open windows, and so I leapt out of my classroom and I ran after that snake. I think that really sums up a lot of what life was like over there. I ended up spending every Sunday morning bird watching around the campus. There's one bird in particular called the spotted owlet, which grew very close to my heart. There were several families that were nesting across the campus. And the unique thing about this bird is that, of course, it has its eyes in the front of its head. It's a small bird. It's perhaps only this big. And when it sees intruders, it bobs its head. And I happened to see that done to me many times, and that really got me fascinated with this bird. In fact, the word owlet has stayed with me, and it's become the name of the online newsletter that I write, among many other things. after graduating from school, I ended up going to Ashoka University. And in the meantime, while I was at school and while I was at this time, I ended up volunteering for a lot of organizations that was doing research work in this space. For instance, Rishi Valley took me to a place called Agumbe, which is the rainiest region in Karnataka. It's in Shimoga, in the heart of the Western Ghats. So it's in a classic Malnad landscape. And this place can be termed the king cobra capital of the world because that's where you find king cobras, especially the Ophiophagus kalinga, which is the one found in South India. That's the best place to go see them. And we ended up going to a research station called the Kalinga Center for Rainforest Ecology. This center was run by a man named now Dr. Gauri Shankar. He is the Indian expert on king cobras. When you think king cobras, Dr. Gauri Shankar's name is what comes up. And so I was fortunate as a child to visit this landscape and then eventually volunteer for them and end up following a king cobra for a couple of weeks. We were filming this king cobra, and so my assignment was to follow the snake and note its movements, and spending a lot of time alone with this snake sitting maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 feet, 15 feet away from me, I think really had an effect on me because snakes are some of the most misunderstood animals. You know, they are the part of this public smear campaign where they are painted to be such vicious creatures. But let me tell you, I have sat within feet of several snakes, king cobras just being one of them. And I've never felt in danger even once because these creatures don't want to harm us. You know, it is not in their interest to harm us. These instances where snakes bite people, it's just a case of, it's just an unfortunate accident and one that we should keep in mind because these creatures really don't want to waste their venom and their time on people like us. While doing this, there were several other opportunities. I ended up, for instance, being part of a small part of the leopard census, this annual leopard census that happens every year, where they count the leopards in Karnataka. It's part of this long-term study to monitor its population. And I helped deploy camera traps in this lesser-known wildlife sanctuary in Karnataka. And like this, there are many others. I went back to my favorite forest, Bandipur Tiger Reserve, and I documented the work that tribals were doing there to remove lantana. So lantana is this invasive species of plant that has taken over India. It was brought into India by the British. It's native to South America, and it's taking over the landscape. And so the tribals at Bandipur are now working, the Jaina Kuruba tribals are working to remove this plant from the reserve. While I was at Ashoka, I remember joining, thinking that my life in that university would be one devoid of wildlife, because when you roll into the campus, you see the surrounding landscape, and it's easy for one to think that this place has no wildlife. You know, especially coming from a place like South India, which is so rich in landscapes and so on. Haryana seemed very dry and barren. The only tall trees were eucalyptus trees, which don't even belong to this country. But I am so happy to tell you that this seemingly barren place was actually full of its own life. I ended up roaming the surrounding fields of our campus, trying to find all the wildlife that I could. And I was surprised to see that right outside the university campus was the largest antelope in India, the nilgai, also called the blue bull. And so I ended up spending 4 years following this antelope across the fields. I ended up tracking these animals, and I've spent so much time, of course, with lone bulls and also with herds that are up to 25 animals strong. It really taught me a lot, and it was so comforting to me that such a large animal lived in such close proximity to my university. I also ended up documenting a lot of the birds found on campus, eventually counting up to more than 130 birds that was found in and around that campus, which is much more than one might imagine for a landscape such as that. And so I ended up compiling all these findings into a small little book. Now, while I was doing all this work, so this, and especially I have not mentioned the Himalayas, it's very hard for me to answer what is my favorite landscape, but the Himalayas certainly is, in my view, the greatest landscape on the planet. It is unparalleled in so many ways. And so when I was at university, I took every opportunity that I could to go and explore the Himalayan oak and pine forests of Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh. I even took up a part-time job at university to fund these travels. And I can say there is something magical about that place. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and I feel like I'm walking through Middle-earth as I walk through those landscapes. Uttarakhand is such a magical place, and those forests almost seem alive in and of themselves. It seems as if those trees are just going to spring to life and walk, just like the ends of Middle-earth. And so I spent a lot of time there. And so while doing all of this, working in the Western Ghats when I had my holidays, working, of course, my time at school, and then spending time in Haryana and, of course, in Uttarakhand and Himachal, I realized that I had gathered a lot of experience, especially for someone of my age. And all of this culminated in one day when I was 19 years old, when my father came up to me and he said, Ishan, maybe it would be a good idea to turn all these experiences into a book. Now, I thought that was a brilliant idea, and I needed someone to really tell me this. And so I remember opening up that day, I was in Munnar in Kerala, and just brain dumping all my thoughts onto a Word doc, some 5,000 odd words of just rough ideas of what the book could look like. And then over 2.5 years since that day, I sat and I edited and I edited and I edited. And I first of all wrote a 70,000 word manuscript, which I then edited around 11 times. I think the standard in the industry is 4 drafts before you end up publishing a book. I did 11 drafts, so you can imagine how much that took. Trying to make this book as best as it could be. This book ended up becoming the story of my life over these last 7-8 years, searching for nature and wildlife across India as a teenager. So my time at school, rescuing all those animals and observing and bird watching and living with these creatures, to then my time volunteering for all these different research projects across the Western Ghats. And of course, my time finally exploring Haryana and then the Himalayas. It culminates in the Himalayas. Now the book, while writing a book, I think every author faces this dilemma of what the book should be named. This is something I was struggling with for a long time. I went through many titles, but nothing really felt right. And then one day, I remember I was driving through rural Tamil Nadu, and the title just came to me. This idea of being lost in the light of wilder things. And that's the thought that came to my mind, and I thought that perfectly captured what the book really talked about. And so that's why the book's title is The Light of Wilder Things, A Teenager's Search for Nature and Wildlife. And I'm happy to say, having published it in May of this year, we're filming this right now, later in 2025, I can say that this book has exceeded my expectations by several miles. You know, this book has garnered praise from such eminent people like Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Diya Mirza, Pitu Sehgal, and also got a foreword from my professor and a mentor of mine, Dr. Mahesh Rangarajan at Ashoka University. It's become a #1 Amazon bestseller across several categories, and I right now, even to this day, get messages from all across the country, people saying that this book really resonated with them. I think as an author, that's one of the most gratifying messages you can receive. While I was doing all this, I also built an environmental educational platform on Instagram. So I realized that a lot of us now spend our time on phones, and if the goal is to get people inspired to care for nature and wildlife, you need to meet people where they're at. And a lot of people are on social media nowadays, primarily Instagram, especially for my generation. And so I started creating educational reels talking about nature and wildlife. So I spend a lot of time in the field, and when I'm there, if I see something that I think could be of interest to my audience, I hand my phone to the person I'm with, and I ask them to film me talking about it. So this could be anything from elephant dung to tiger scrape marks to a piece of shed skin from a snake and so on. The idea is to bring the public into this world and show them that right now, as you and I live and breathe, as you are watching this video, there are creatures out there with beating hearts in them that have not perished from the earth. And I think it's important to celebrate their life in all their wonder. And so that's what the goal of the Instagram platform is, along with the book. And in the name of this very same goal, I decided to start Eco Inspire. So Eco Inspire is a national environmental education program that I created, where I go to different institutions, schools, colleges, and so on, and I talk to students about nature and wildlife. The premise is the same. I want to get people inspired and cared for nature and get them to care for nature. And this can only happen when you take the message to the people who need to hear it. I strongly believe that there is no hope for our natural world if we don't get the younger generation inspired to care for it. I'm so happy to say, I remember starting this program thinking that, will this be a success? Will it not? Will it really resonate with the people I wanted to resonate with? And I'm happy to say that this has resonated so deeply with my audience. I started with the goal of reaching 10,000 students across the country. That means going to each school and speaking to as many people as possible and reaching the goal 10,000. And now we have reached 27,000 students. That is 27,000 students in across more than 100 institutions in more than 20 cities across 5 states in India, with many more states and cities lined up. And I can say in every school that I've spoken at, there is this light that you can see in children's eyes. They perk up, they're interested, they want to learn more about these creatures. I think that's a real testament to the infinite power of nature to inspire. And so I'm happy to have been able to tap into that and to be able to speak for them. I think it's important that we speak for these creatures that really can't speak for themselves. Now I hope to take this message to new places. I'm interested to see how I could take this into new avenues, because the goal is to reach as many people as possible, reach them however as possible. I think the one shining message of my life is that nature has the power to inspire, and I want to spend a good chunk of my life championing their cause. You know, conservation is the issue of our times. We live in a time where we've lost, for instance, 97% of all the tiger range and habitat we've had over the last century or two. We've lost so much of our bird population. We have lost so much of our insect population, so many other things due to development. And we are really at the final frontier with the last few wild spaces and the last few wild animals remaining. And so it is imperative that all of us put our hands together and bring these creatures and bring the natural world back from the brink. That's something that I want to do. And this manifests in so many different ways. It manifests in how we deal with human-wildlife conflict, something that we are seeing rising over the last decade or so. It's how we deal with habitat loss, and in both preserving the wild spaces that we have left and in rewilding new spaces so that we can create good wildlife corridors to ensure that animals are able to move from one forest patch to another, and so that genetic diversity is maintained across the landscape. It manifests in how we stop poaching and how we give would-be poachers an adequate livelihood so that they can sustain themselves and while our wildlife can be preserved, and so many other different problems. I think there are several issues that we need to tackle, but I'm happy to say that there are so many people working on this. You know, I think we live in a media climate that only highlights all the environmental catastrophe that's happening. But that is only one side of the story, and I think it can be really debilitating to only see that one side of the story. I am happy to tell you right now that there are so many people out there in India doing some incredible work, whether it's saving one specific species like the gharial in the Chambal River, or whether it's trying to rewild entire landscapes in US and Europe and so many other places. You know, there are so many people working and doing such good work to save our natural spaces, and I think it's important that we highlight them. And so a lot of my work is in trying to highlight these good causes and showing that there is still hope left. You know, in the spirit of the late Jane Goodall, there is still hope to save our wild spaces. And so I ask that you join this movement, because no matter what you do, whether you're a computer scientist or whether you're a graphic designer or whether you're whatever you do, you can help this movement. And that is by leveraging your skills to champion the cause of the natural world. And so I ask that you join this movement. I ask that you contribute however you can, whether that is just by consuming as less as possible, whether that means rejecting single-use plastic, or whether that means ditching your profession and trying to work for a conservation organization by using your skills. Whatever capacity in which you can help, please help, because every single hand that joins this cause will help bend the arc of history towards a better future, to borrow the words of Martin Luther King. So I ask that you join in this movement. I'll see you on the other side.